Hello, everyone. This is a content warning for today's episode. This episode includes a conversation around suicide and suicide ideation, as well as what it means for those who are left behind after a suicide. Please use your discretion while listening to this episode, and if this is a subject matter that is uncomfortable for you, please consider checking out any of our other recordings, our ones that come after this. And please be well.
Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Untying Knots. This is Perry Clark here with you. Licensed marriage and family therapist. If you hear my voice sounds a little different today, as it is, we are recording this in June, and this is going to be airing in September. I caught COVID, and so I've been dealing this last week before this interview with doing all of that. So if you suddenly hear me disappear for a while, that's probably because I'm having a coughing fit. Otherwise, I want to remind you that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes. This is not a substitute for licensed mental care, health care. I do recommend you seek out a therapist in your area to work on your unique issues. So today we have the other half of if you haven't heard the interview before this, with Tananarive Dues. I got her illustrious writing partner and partner in life, Stephen Barnes, here with us to be able to talk about his work, especially the work that he's been working on, an interesting book that focuses a lot more on Buddhism, and as well as the interesting connection we can have with Black Buddhism, and not to mention just being a creator, writer, and part of my creator series, and how mental health also plays a part in all of that. So, Stephen Barnes is a New York Times best-selling author of over 30 novels of science fiction, horror, and suspense. The Image, The Endeavor, and the Cable Ace award-winning author also writes for television, including The Twilight Zone, Stargate SG-1, Andromeda, and Emmy award-winning episode of The Outer Limits. He has also taught at UCLA, Seattle University, lectured at the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. with his wife, British Fantasy Award-winning author Tananarive Dues. She gave me a little crap on the name. I'm trying to make sure I say it right here. He has created online courses in Afrofuturism, Black horror, and screenwriting. Stephen was born in Los Angeles, California, and except for a decade in the Northwest and 3 years in Atlanta, Georgia, he has lived in that area all his life. Steve and Tiana live in their Tiana will live with their son Jason. You can also reach them at the AfroFuturismWebinar.com and the SunkenPlaceClassroom.com. So, Stephen, welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered.
Hey, Perry, how you doing?
Having my
could have been better.
Having my dance with COVID.
Well, at least you're alive, and we had those inoculations.
Definitely.
The average plague lasts between 2 and 3 years, so we're right on schedule to be getting through this.
Oh yeah,
all is well.
Yep, exactly. So, that being said, and everything that it has revealed, its own little apocalypse, so to speak. Let's move on to more fun, or that might be a subject matter for some of your future books. How did you get here?
Okay, by here, you're going to need to be touch more specific, and I can say that there are 3 areas in my life that I focus on, so I will accept any questions about any of them. One would be my writing career, one would be my family, and one would be martial arts. Those are all 3 things that I care about a lot.
Well, let's start with the writing career, because that gets very much into the creative aspect, but I think the other 2 are also equally important, and I'm betting they have their connection to the creative side.
They're more art than science.
Yeah, so let's start there.
I've always written, man. I was, before I could write, I told elaborate lies. And I got tired of being spanked for that, and I noticed that if I wrote them down as stories, people liked me instead of punished me, so I was kind of on that path.
Mm-hmm.
There are any number of different things that I could go into there, but I dropped out of college and started taking jobs in Hollywood while I was working on short stories, and eventually started selling them. I wanted some help, and most of what I've accomplished in my life, I've accomplished using a few simple principles. One of those is that if you want to learn how to do something, find somebody who's already good at it and do what they did. And so I was looking for a mentor, and I was blessed to find Larry Niven, and to be able to communicate with him in a way that made a relationship between the two of us a real possibility, and a friendship and a mentorship. And I have nothing but joy for what that man and his partner, Jerry Pornell, gave to me over the course of my life. So, that's probably the short version of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's a beautiful one. It's also very interesting to talk about that idea is like growing up basically telling lies, but once you wrote them down, it stopped getting in trouble.
Yeah, I remember in elementary school, it was open house. A little girl came up to my mother and said, "Mrs. Barnes, is Stephen really a vampire?" She said, "Of course not." She looked at me and said, "Did you say that?" I said, "No, Mom. I mean, how can I say I was a vampire? Vampires don't come out during the day." But that was, I just always had that kind of a strange mind. And the first story I can remember ever writing was called The Yeti. I must have written it about third grade, about an abominable snowman in a Canadian lumber camp, so starring Bill Conway's character, who appeared in many of my early stories.
Well, but that also showed the aspect of where your creativity was, as well as how that creativity was deal with life.
As far as I'm concerned, all the creativity, people who say, "I'm not creative," they just don't understand. Every human being goes quietly insane every single night. All conscious creativity is creating a hole, a channel between the fulminate of the unconscious mind and our conscious mind, and the skills that allow us to take that creativity and flow it into the world. So it's not that there are some people that are creative and others aren't. It's that some people trust their creativity and others don't. Some people listen to their creativity and others don't. I could take anybody and make them creative, especially once you got them to give up the thought that their first drafts have to look good. People are just terrified that their first drafts are going to suck. Embrace the suck, says I.
Oh, yeah. Well, that perfectionism is definitely something that comes up when I'm working with somebody in therapy as well, is how much has that created an inner critic that slows them down, let alone has become a voice that is also restraining them.
One of these days, I'm going to have a T-shirt made of one of my favorite expressions. Perfectionism is procrastination masquerading as quality control.
Oh, that's beautiful. Definitely beautiful. I don't know. That would be one that we could basically use as a Patreon gift if you guys wanted to put your life writing podcast to it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe so. We're still trying to figure out what to do with the life writing podcast. We enjoy doing it. We're going to keep doing it. But I think over the next couple of weeks, we're going to make some decisions about how to do it more consciously. What is this that we're trying to accomplish here? What is the best way to do it? Otherwise, we'll just keep having fun.
Well, and that's one of the biggest goals. I know I've sort of discovered that and doing
Dalai
this
Lama
myself.
Seems to think so. Meaning of life is to seek joy.
Well, I think that's a beautiful segue into talking about this crafting of work that you did, the Eightfold Path. Very much so. So what was the inspiration behind creating
this? First, I've got to ask you the question. Did you like it?
I enjoyed it. Good. There were definitely some points in there where it's like, okay, I know this is stories based off of Buddhist. I'm trying to see where that is, what the thread is in there, even if I don't know all the Buddhist tales and so forth.
Well,
but even just on the standpoint of just pure fiction entertainment factor of it, I very much enjoyed it.
Good. I mean, it's not specifically for practicing Buddhists. It's more people who are like I am. I'm a fellow traveler. I'm not a Buddhist. Charles Johnson is a Buddhist, who I wrote it with. I think it came from looking at different ways that people had organized collections of stories over the years, the Illustrated Man and Vault of Horror and Tales from the Crypt and stuff like this. And I just, and there are lots of different organizing factors for that. But they generally involve a group of people who come to a way station of some kind where there's an old man or an old woman who tends to them while they're waiting for something and has them tell stories or tell stories to them. And then at the end, you find out that there is a larger meaning to all. And I just thought to myself that Buddhism's Eightfold Path, which was the first thing that the Buddha did when he came from under the tree, the Bodhi tree, and received his enlightenment, was he lectured on the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering in the world. There's a cause of that suffering. There is an answer for the suffering, and that answer is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path itself is instructions of behaviors, attitudes, more behaviors than attitudes, that will help one leave suffering behind. They're embraced in categories like right speech, right action, right occupation, etc., right meditation, and so forth and so on. And so I thought, something, I think that it would be possible to organize a series of stories using that framework. I want to be very careful about this, and I thought that a graphic novel would be the best form for that, better form for that than prose for a variety of reasons. And I thought, Charles Johnson, Chuck's a buddy. I wonder if I could get him interested in this. If I knew that there was someone who was kind of interested in publishing it, which was John Jennings, who was enthusiastic about it and supported the project. And then I got Chuck on board, and that gave me the confidence to feel that I wasn't going to go too far off the reservation. And then the game began.
Very much so. And I have some of John Jennings' work sitting in my to-read section. So, but I noticed that our classic backwoods horror story to a very futuristic story in here. So was there a certain sets of tones that inspired based off of the Eightfold Path that said, this is the story that would work for this one, or this was, or what sort of inspired each of these different?
I think that I trusted my unconscious mind about that. There were a couple of stories where it was very straightforward and very clear. I think the last word is clearly right speech. But the others, I took a look at a couple of stories that Chuck and I had done together, and I kind of figured, something, as a practicing Buddhist and a Buddhist scholar, in all likelihood, anything that he finds of interest to write would probably express something close enough to one of these values to be useful. So I think that was true. We took a look at the story. 4189 was one of those stories. The Best Barbecue in Hatton County was one of those stories. And I think there was one other one. The Last Word. And we felt that all three of those stories could work. Then it was a matter of coming up with additional stories. And so we did that, and then looked at, would this story fit into this category? Would it suggest this category? Is it a twining of this? And we felt that all 8 of the stories that exist in that book worked sufficiently that a person who begins to ask questions about it will be led to a discussion that is useful. Discussion ultimately being, what is the nature of humanity? What is the nature of reality? How can we be happy in the world? Like I said, the Dalai Lama said the meaning of life is to be happy, and then he added later on, and to be of service. I think that is a lovely sentiment. So some of the stories teach what happens when you specifically do not follow the path, when you steal, kill, harm, lie, You do not protect the children.
Mm-hmm.
And through via negativa, teaching by the opposite example. Is it successful? That's not for me to say. I've been very pleased looking at the reviews from people. I think that most people saw what we were doing. A lot of them really appreciate what it is that we were doing. And there are a few people who didn't, but that's honest. We weren't going to clearly label the stories because life is too messy for that. You expect life to give you clear instances of what you're supposed to do and be in order to be happy. You must think people are idiots, because if it was easy, if it was clear, everybody'd be happy. But there is so much misery in the world that I suggest that we would not have been doing a service to make it really simple and really clearly labeled. We're asking people to engage and ask the question. We believe that all 8 of those paths are covered in there. If you think not, that's a discussion. I can have that discussion with you. That's a good discussion. And then we can talk about, why is it important? And what is this? How do you apply this in your life? And such. Those, to me, the discussions, the questions are more important than the answers.
Well, one of those elements, even in all of those, that at least I could see from the stories, is also the element of choice.
Yes, absolutely.
And that, for me, was a very clear line. There was a choice in so many of these things.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm so glad you saw that. I believe that we do have, assuming that a person does not have organic brain dysfunction. It's not, literally their brain is hanging out of their head, pharmaceutically, if not economically. I believe that we do have that choice. We have a choice whether or not we're happy. We have a choice whether or not we're healthy. We have choices. Anything that is affected by behavior, we have choices. The people who are too chaotic to take any responsibility for their behavior, often institutionalized. Others, I hope, will find professionals like you, I always suggest that people bring mental health professionals into their personal circle and their health circle of providers. But I think that once you have that, our responsibility is to ourselves and to the child inside us, the child that we were once upon a time. And if we are to be happy in the world, if we don't take responsibility, if we're waiting for the world to come to us and say, here's your happiness, you're going to wait a long time. And that may not be fair, but I would rather be a human being in the worst part of the world than a rabbit in the woods. I mean, life can be tough, but have you looked at the natural world? We're no crueler than the natural world. We're really not.
Yeah, the natural it's a beautiful place. It's a dangerous place, and just because something is a prey does not mean nature didn't give it some sort of way of fighting back.
I believe that it wouldn't have survived to reproduce if there were any predators around it. I mean, if there are any predators around it, then it's either it's got to either be able to fight or run or hide. It's much like, I think, a lot of what people call toxic masculinity is simply somebody has to go out and fight the tigers. Somebody has to go out and fight the other tribe. That damages you. It also leads to hierarchical organization. And the person who's the baddest guy in the village is likely to say, follow me or I'll break your head. Democracy is an evolution over that. And we need to understand that for 30,000 years or 100,000 years, human life was one way. And now, as old as maybe a couple thousand years, Greek city-states at the beginning, a few hundred years, America, England, the Magna Carta or whatever it is that suggested that the rulers have responsibility to the people instead of just, the people having responsibility to the rulers, and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. We're working this stuff out. And I think that it is critical to remember that the world has never been a warm and welcoming place if you didn't have teeth and fangs.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that sometimes when I'm talking to those that are, I have to remind them that even bunny rabbits have teeth and fangs.
Yeah. I think that what happens is you have people who were hurt when they were younger and made to feel helpless. And so now their attitude is, I will seem so helpless that no one will think I'm a threat. And those people, if they also are very open-hearted, they had better be protected by somebody who cares about them and has fangs and claws. Because the open-hearted person who does not know how to protect themselves is a lure for predators.
And that's a big one when we talk about issues like narcissism, especially when it starts getting into the families and then how we have family trauma, generational trauma.
Oh yeah, but the racial trauma is gigantic in the sense of what did 400 years of rape, murder, torture, theft, brainwashing, etc., and gaslighting at a fantastic level do to us? Now, I just had a conversation on Facebook. I love Facebook because there's like 2 billion people on it. So basically, it's the world.
Right.
What you're seeing in Facebook is the way the world is. It's too large a sample to not contain everything that's out there. And there was a woman who was talking about. There was a meme from a woman talking about, I've given up on love. All I want is sex, and this, that, and the other. And it's relationships are too painful. And I made the observation that somebody had hurt her. And this lady came back at me with, well, you can't say that based on that. There are a lot of people here who agree with her. And I said, well, yeah, but I'm willing to go out on that limb. I'm willing to say that a healthy, 99% of healthy human beings want somebody to love. Maybe 99.9. And when you see somebody saying it's too painful, you might as well be looking at somebody who says, I don't mind living in a cardboard box, or I don't mind being 300 pounds overweight. They're not telling you the truth. Something has happened, that I'm willing to bet that something has happened along the way that damaged their ability to believe in themselves and love themselves and protect themselves and believe that their efforts would get them something better or know how their efforts possibly could. You can damage someone to the point that you can crush a bug until it can't move anymore. And maybe it sits there and says, I don't mind not being able to move. But you might leave them alone, but don't buy into the lie. Because that lie will infect you. And you'll start looking at your life and saying, well, maybe I can't be happy. Maybe I can't be healthy. Maybe I can't be successful. Maybe it's wrong to want to be successful. That 400 years of damage to black people removed our sense of self. It was like wiping a hard drive on a computer. Then you implant a particular set of instructions. Call it Slave 1.0. This is how you survive in this context. And then finally you set them free without actually guaranteeing their rights. And you put over that, call it, American 1776, program. But it's resting on top of Slave 1.0. And the rest of the culture is still kind of saying, well, we tell you can have your full rights, but if you try to get them, Greenwood, Tulsa, don't even try. So is it any question that the system crashes? Is it any question that we have a hard time understanding what we are or have a hard time finding each other in life? In one sense, there should be nothing easier than finding love. Every rabbit in the woods does it. But human beings, we're having real problems, and I think black men and women are having real problems finding each other. And I am not willing to say, there are two things I'm not willing to say. One, that it's their fault. Two, that it's not their responsibility. It is not your fault. The damage that was done to you and to the family, very real. But it is your responsibility because there's no one else. It's just there's no one else. If you fall off a ship in the middle of the ocean, you better swim or drown. It may not be fair at all, but that's simply the situation. You swim or drown. And you can say all you want to about how unfair it is, but I'd suggest you save your wind and swim.
Well, it's even more the aspect of the idea that there is the notion of fair.
Yeah.
And fair is really, sadly, one of those that is, despite what we'd like to teach, it is one of those things that is subjective. And that subjectivity is going to affect whether or not you're swimming Or are you basically enjoying the water as you go into the depths?
Look, all these people, as far as I'm concerned, who, let me say this very carefully, because I do believe that there are people who need professional help and there are people who need medication. I am not denying that. However, you could take the most depressive human being in the world with suicidal ideation. If I take their head and stick it in a bucket of water, they're going to fight for their lives. Why? Because the body wants to live. Emotionally, we can be so screwed up that it hurts too much to live. But if you get in touch with the survival drive, that's a part of you that will keep fighting no matter what. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why the majority of the profound world disciplines impact the breathing in one way or the other. Pranayama and martial arts and Qigong and stuff like this. Because breathing is the only process that's both voluntary and autonomic. And when you slow your breathing down to below about 4 breaths per minute, the carbon dioxide level in your blood raises and your hindbrain starts going ding, 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 ding. You can actually, by manipulating your breathing, you can actually get in touch with your core survival drive in a relatively safe situation. You don't have to, be on a roller coaster, which is safe, but, you have to drive some distance to do it, or almost be in a car crash or fight off a mugger. You can literally just slow your breathing down and start feeling what the meat knows, what the body knows. I think that's one of the major things that we've lost as a society as we've become more sedentary. We've stopped being in touch with our bodies, and our bodies want to live. And so if you ground yourself in your survival drive, now it's safe to open your heart and love the world. Because you know that if somebody messes with you, you'll bare your teeth. Then, with that love and that empathy, you can start developing a map of what existence is so that you can reach your goals of being happy with greater facility. And ultimately, I think that people who attempt to balance themselves in all 3 ways begin to sense the spiritual aspect of life.
Which I think is also very much an element I see in some of the stories, like the love story, the endless night story. That's the time travel one I'm thinking of. Even to a certain extent, the zombie apocalypse storyline that's there.
It's about values, isn't it? I stuck in the 3 gates into that story. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it useful? Which is a shortened version of the Eightfold Path. Because I think that if everything you do or say passes those 3, you're on your. That's not at all a bad recipe for making a good, moral, decent human being. That ain't bad.
And it's not only recognizing it's valuing those 3 places and being willing to take the time, even if it's in those few brief moments of a breath, to ask those 3 questions.
That's right.
Too much, and I know I paint this picture when I'm dealing with clients, that the adult mind has the chance to respond. It has a chance to look at the different possibilities. It has a chance to figure out, okay, this is a possibility we can work with. This is a possibility we don't want to work with. How do we modulate that? As opposed to a kid, or response is instantaneous, get away, that runner's response, whatever the consequences, be damned, but I'm out of the situation.
Right. So is this conversation going in the direction that you wanted? Is this what you needed from me?
Oh, let's put it this way. I look at it as freeform. Even when I'm in a therapy session, I have no idea what my client is going to, what direction we're going to go into. So this is perfectly normal. I don't know if my audience is getting the same thing out of it, but I hope they will. And I hope they will find, is it necessary? Is it truthful? Is it
useful?
Bringing stuff useful?
Yeah. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it useful? The truth is the first gate. Then whether or not you are speaking with kindness. I can't think of a piece of information that has to be conveyed cruelly. And is it useful? Is it this moving you towards your goal? If not, why are you doing it? If it's cruel, why are you doing it? I mean, I might have to hurt a mugger, but I'm not going to curb stomp him. I'm not going to torture him. I'm just going to stop him. And is it true? To the best of your ability, is what you're saying the truth? Those 3 those three governors on speech and behavior, they're massive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you apply that to yourself, is what you just said about yourself true? Is it kind? Was it kind to you to say that to yourself? Was it useful? What exact purpose did it serve for you to say that to yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that very much also goes back into what I was saying earlier about the narcissism and the sort of way it brings out family trauma. Because one of the things we have seen with narcissism is that it is an inability for the person to be able to handle the truth for themselves. They require somebody outside of them to be the either projection or provide that, but as long as it doesn't match what they want to hear, then it becomes something that they have to resist against. And those tooth and claws come out in a way that the survival response then turns destructive.
Right.
So I think this is a perfect place for us to take a break. And as we focus on those three truths, we're going to be back here on Untying Knots with I'm Perry Clark and here with Stephen Barnes as we get into the second half. So hang in there, folks. We'll be back shortly.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information. You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingnotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingnotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our second half here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, and here with author, creator, teacher Stephen Barnes, who we just recently been talking about his work with the Eightfold Path, and there's one particular set of stories in there where which focus on martial arts, which I know is a passion based on those other questions I asked you at the beginning. So I'm curious about how the martial arts both became a very good part of your life and how it also influenced the story that I see in this book too.
Well, they became part of my life because I was tired of being bullied. And that story has an incident that actually happened to me where a kid named Rudy and his brother and his brother's friends thought that I had narked on them. They thought that I had turned them into the principal. And they chased me and surrounded me and were beating the hell out of me. And I put my books down and I walked out into the middle of the street, stood on the double yellow line with cars and trucks zipping past on both sides. And I looked at him in the eye, and a voice that I'd never heard come out of me said, "Come out here and do that." If he'd come out there, I was going to push him in front of a truck. I was going to kill him. And he looked at me and he knew it. That changed everything from that day forward. What I realized was that I'd found a place inside myself that was extraordinary, that was not my ordinary concept of self. And after many, that I needed to find out how to get back there. And that led to the martial arts. What I did not understand was that martial arts is not kicking and punching, although those are ways to learn how to stay in a space so that you can absorb certain things by osmosis. The core of the martial arts, in terms of what I was looking for, is the attitude, I'm ready to die and I'm ready to take you with me. That position is as powerful a position as it is possible for a human being to have. You do not want to push someone into that state. And the greatest leaders and transformative human beings on this planet have been people who understood very clearly that they were going to die and they were going to accomplish something with their lives before that happened, including potentially taking an oppressor with them. Mm-hmm. The physical aspects of the art are all interesting, but I would rather fight a black belt. I'd rather fight 2 black belts than a woman trying to protect her baby. Because all the rules are gone. See, female animals in general are as dangerous as male animals. But men and women have played a game that we decided to play because it was, from my position, it was productive for producing the maximum number of grandchildren. Men would pretend to be stronger and braver than they really were. Women would pretend to be weaker and with less courage than they really were. And there was a split, and this allowed babies to be generated at a greater rate than the tribe over there that did it differently. Whatever rules generated the most babies, that's the people who lived to pass on their customs. So the martial arts, yes, they are, punching and kicking and throwing and weapons and this, that, and the other. But at the core of all of that is what are you willing to die for? Because if you know what you're willing to die for, then it's easy to figure out what you're willing to live for.
It's making me think of one of the lines from, not familiar if you're familiar with the show Babylon 5.
Good man.
Yep. And the line that's often said by the Rangers is that we live for the one, we die for the one. And in one of the subsequent episodes, they basically had the Jakar's character saying, why do you always put the emphasis on the die? Why don't you put it as like, we die for the one, we live for the one?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the difference is that you actually need both.
Oh, yeah, you definitely need both.
If you don't have both, then your fear of losing life will make you a liar. When my father was dying, he lived up in the Bay Area near you. And by the way, I'm going to be guest of honor at Baycon.
Oh, lovely!
Come by and say hi.
I will try.
And he was dying of cancer, and the cancer just ate him up, man. I mean, he looked like the Crypt Keeper. It was bad. And there was a part of me, I didn't want to look at this because my father hadn't been there when I was growing up. I tried to, create a relationship with him after I was grown, and I think we'd done okay about it. But I realized that if I turned away from the image of him at the end of his life, I was missing the last thing he had to offer me, the last gift he had to give me, which was a clear understanding that this is how life ends. And I decided to accept that gift from him. And I took that image, and I've got that image sitting on my left shoulder. I've got death sitting on my left shoulder and life sitting on my right shoulder. And when life and death agree that an action is appropriate, that's a good action.
I'm wondering, I can see that being an interesting short story for you guys to start writing, if not turn it into an interesting Twilight Zone episode.
Well, the metaphor has probably worked its way into a lot of my writing. If it's called a martial art, you then have to ask the question, what does that mean? As opposed to, let's say, a martial science. Because the martial science would be, the angles and the strategy, tactics and the body parts and stuff like that. But in art, if martial relates to war, art relates to self-expression. I would say that art is self-expression, expression of the deep self. Successful art is expression of the deep self that communicates to someone else sufficiently if they're willing to exchange money for it, or they feel what it is you wanted them to feel. In martial arts, you might express what you are in terms of preparedness to fight and die for what you believe in, to the point that the other person receives that message and decides that they're going to look for a lamer antelope. It's like, I am not the antelope you're looking for.
And for those who, since seeing this audio, he just did the Star Wars gesture from these aren't the droids you're looking for maneuver.
That's right. The warrior is as valid an archetype as the healer, the teacher, the lover, all of those things, the hunter. Warrior skills and hunting skills are very, very closely allied.
But their purposes are always very different. One is to feed and keep the people fed. The other is to keep them away from harm.
Yes, but they overlap. A hunter, you might send a hunter after a lion.
Yeah, definitely agree with you.
You're not going to eat him,
but
you're using those skills. And they're the same skills that you would use against a human predator, and the same mental skills you would use fighting a forest fire. It's important. It's as important as having babies and protecting them and loving them and nurturing them and changing diapers and playing with them. And the soft emotions are only safe if there's something to protect them. And I think that a lot of people who are too far into the yin of it don't value the yang, and people who are too far into the yang of it don't appreciate the yin. So they both miss the Tao, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to get to. Is like they know the two roles, but they get lost only staying focused on one, as opposed to knowing that they move between them. And that flexibility is one of the things that sometimes we have to reteach people, because in some cases they've never been taught it before.
It's true. I mean, you teach people. We need to teach people to think. We need to teach people to feel, and we need to teach people to move. That is the thing that more and more people are, for all practical purposes, blind because they don't have their proprioceptive sense. They don't know where their bodies are in three-dimensional space. The epidemic of obesity and inactivity has robbed us of some of our natural heritage as human animals. And without that, we become head cases. We have ideas about the world, and those ideas chase each other around in our heads, and we don't know how to test them. And it's tragic.
Yeah. I know in the particular methodology of brain spotting, we're looking at using the sensory system to help with the processing and get into the subcortical areas of the brain to reconnect information. And
the brain has phenomenal redundancy built into it.
Oh, yes.
There's a lot of research using movement of various kinds to try to reconnect. I think that the old patterns, things Tai Chi and yoga and so forth, are fantastic for that. And there are other things too, but they're using virtual reality, and they're using a bunch of things to try to overcome strokes and damage and so forth. But for God's sake, don't forget just getting outside and moving around in the world.
Well, it's the conversation I had with someone else. Is the tech pro solution. Everything can be fixed with a machine, and it can't be.
Yeah.
Or from the deeper fundamental aspect of everyone I get so many emails in my junk mail talking about, develop this app, develop that app. And I'm looking at it as like, you want a tech solution to a human relationship problem.
Right. Now, there are people who would be unhappy about Zoom, that dehumanizing. But man, during the pandemic, Zoom just saved me. I mean, I could not hug my daughter down in San Diego. It broke my heart. And without Zoom to talk to her every week, or anytime she wanted, a little time with Daddy, it would have broken my heart. And, VR, fantastic. Every week we would play VR mini golf together in cyberspace. She's down in San Diego. We're here. I remember once she was in San Diego, I was here, and her mom was in Chicago, or stepmom was in Chicago or something like that. And we were all playing VR mini golf on the same course with another buddy of ours. And we were together, and for a little while, the pandemic didn't matter. We were able to laugh and joke and be together almost as if we could touch. Critical importance.
And I think it's those critical, important moments like that that get erased when somebody wants it all to be just one thing. Or it's like, it's like, and I think that's also subjective in that aspect, in the standpoint of, okay, you guys found that connection. Great, wonderful. For someone else, they needed that actual face-to-face, being in the same room, sadly breathing the same air. And because they can't see that nuanced difference.
Well, if they can't see that, then they can't claim to know the answer, can they?
Mm-hmm.
What's happening here is that their perceptions are too narrow. They don't get it. It's like somebody saying this flavor of cake is the best cake in the world, and everybody should eat it, and this is all you need to eat. What?
Which interestingly goes back to the three gifts.
Yeah, is it true? It's not true. It's simply not true. And it is unkind in the sense that you are saying that you care about people, but you're ignoring what people say. That's an isolating thing. It's a dehumanizing thing. And it's not useful, not if you're trying to relieve human misery. Trying to make people happier, less fearful. I think that right now, the biggest problems we have in America are connected to fear. One of my spiritual teachers said a long time ago, and anger is a mask over fear. I have never heard anyone being angry at anything where I could not dig down deep enough and find something they were afraid of that anger was resting on. Remove fear, anger dissolves, no need for it. Sometimes with some people, they are so disconnected from their own emotions. Somebody who's been badly abused in childhood, there's just raving lava-like oceans of fear, in a child being helpless. I don't even want to go down that road. But the adult sometimes simply walls over that. And in some cases, we'll get a lot of martial arts skills or something like that. And I'm a badass. I have nothing to be afraid of. But they never cleaned up the stuff with the abuse.
The kid, yeah.
It's still down there. And they don't understand why they get so angry. I had a kid, good kid. He was a young black belt named Uli. And we were teaching at a children's camp. And he was tremendous, fine martial artist. And at the end of the day, I'm sitting out on the porch, and he comes and sits down next to me, and he says very quietly, "Steve, when will I stop being afraid?" And I realized I had nothing to say to him. I was a different person then, but I realized that he had never cleaned up the emotional motivations that had gotten him into martial arts in the first place. He thought that developing speed and power would compensate for having a loving, healed heart. And about 5 months later, he blew his brains out. And I swore to God, when I heard that, I would never be caught without an answer again. It's not that it's my responsibility. No, everybody's life is their own responsibility. But I was never going to be in a situation where someone would come and open themselves like that. Clearly, he was desperate for help. And I couldn't help him because I didn't understand myself enough to understand others. That was the beginning of a deeper investigation for me.
I think it's already. I think we've already gone into the question about the myths and realities of mental health with that. But I'll just go ahead and say it there. That is one of the deepest things we work with when we're working with people in therapy.
How could you work with anything deeper? When someone is in such pain that they don't want to live, all I can do is hope that they will find the resources they need. The therapists like you, or counselors, loved ones, something to put them back in touch with their hearts, and their survival, and not feel despair, and not feel that there's something broken about them. It really broke my heart, Perry. I've never recovered from that. And I shouldn't have. It made me a different person.
It becomes part of that. Like we're talking about the balancing between the living and the dying. It gives purpose to your living.
Yes, right now what I want is to be as healthy and happy and energetic and successful as I can be, and also show other people how to do it. Starting with loving themselves. Starting with knowing how to heal their hearts, how to get in touch with the part of them that will protect them at any cost. And then the techniques with which you can build a successful life. I was lucky enough that my mom turned me on to stuff like Think and Grow Rich and the Power of Positive Thinking and Psycho-Cybernetics and stuff like that when I was just a little kid. And it went deep. And the idea that we can create lives of joy is something I believe in. I just believe in it. Life may not owe us everything. But I think the average person can have a healthy body, a career doing something they enjoy that supports them well, and be married to someone that they love deeply, who turns them on and who's turned on by them, and so a partner with which to walk through life. I believe that those basic things are possible for all of us, but we do need a little help and guidance.
So very true. And well, what we offer in therapy is help with that. We can't provide it can't give everyone that answer. They've got to find it for themselves.
Well, I'm glad
we just try to help them find it,
my friend. I'm sure your people come to you honestly, and you deal with them honestly, and I'm sure they have been benefited thereby.
Well, that's all I can ask in the world with my work,
isn't it? So, what else can I do for you?
Well, I think at this point, it's actually time for us to start wrapping up because it's been a fun hour.
Great. Well, people can find me and Tananarive at various email addresses, sunkenplaceclass.com, afrofuturismwebinar.com. If you're interested in the warrior arts, we talked about realwarriorsjourney.com, or if you just want to listen in on our conversations, lifewritingpodcast.com. We have a writing program that we really stand behind. It is, a year long. Every week you get writing prompts. And life writing is the process of using writing tools in life and life's tools in writing. So this is what we're using every day to navigate our career, our literary and Hollywood careers, as well as finding ways to stay in love with each other every day.
Beautiful.
A lot to talk about there.
Definitely, and I'd give it a listen. I've been listening to it as well.
Fantastic. And lifewritingpodcast.com. I'm honored to have been here, Perry. Thank you so much for asking me.
Well, thank you for being able to have the time and talk about this book and your work and share these thoughts because we need to hear them.
Fantastic.
So keep writing, keep creating, keep living, and stay safe. All right, folks. So tune in for our next one here on Voice America Network. This has been Perry Clark with Stephen Barnes, and be well out there.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.